When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ludlow, and enjoy today's episode. But I want to ask you this, Rick. What is your thoughts on all the geopolitical stuff going on? I'm here. Ukraine's kind of out of control right now. The media is not really covering it, and I think it's for a reason. Everything is there's always some sideshows going on the media is focusing on. What's your thoughts on all that?
Well, you know, the Ukraine thing is very controversial because, of course, that government had a reputation itself of being corrupt to a degree and all that other stuff. And a lot of Americans, again, rightfully so, are concerned with the amount of monies that we're pushing in that direction. I have a different view for the simple reason that I am a Cuban who saw communism destroy his family and his first country. I know what they do. I know that the Cubans were backed by the Russians and then Soviets. So for me, if Ukraine can become the Soviet Union's number 2 Afghanistan experience, and like it did, you know, a few years back when the wall fell, I think that's a very good investment. Our troops are there only in training and in advising. They have been for years. That's part of the new bench in the military, helping our allies rather than just fighting bad guys. And I'm a firm believer that if we support the Ukrainians, look at the demoralization of the Russians, their military, the broken glass of the invincibility of the Soviet war machine has been proven to be a fantasy. So,
do you think we'll be there for a while longer? Or what's your prediction from us using your CIA mind? What's going to happen over there?
You know, I think that it is something that can be turned around if the world jumps in and helps out a little bit more. You know, the one disadvantage that we have versus the Russians or the Chinese is that our population can listen to all this information, whether it's good, bad, or bullshit, and the Russians can block all that. I mean, you know, they same thing with the Chinese. They don't have that vulnerability as much, and still, don't get me wrong, we're getting stuff in there just like we pump it into Cuba and all these other, you know, the real news. But I honestly think that, you know, Europe for one has to really, you know, cowboy up and help them because they're the next frontier. And the United States shouldn't be carrying the single heaviest load without a lot more help from our allies.
You know, Rick, that's my biggest gripe about that whole thing is why are we funding this war with our tax dollars? Why isn't the UN sending money over to? Why is the U.S. you know bankroll all these different wars we're getting involved with? It's causing inflation for us.
I totally agree. You know, and I think that there should be a. No, let's face it. The United States is the policeman of the world, and I tell people that I hope that God never forsakes the United States because the day he or she does, he's forsaken the world. And I get it that we have the major responsibility. We're the guys with the white hats, blah blah blah. But you're absolutely right. You know, we should be getting a protection tax from the Saudis, and some of these other places that are. The Emirates, all allies, all very wealthy, but all of them exist because we have been able to help them exist. And I think that they should be picking up a substantial more financial load. We're not asking them to send their guys. That's not their forte. And they don't have the equipment. I mean, they don't make the equipment. So, but at least financially, they can afford to be helping this cause a lot more.
Is it that because our politicians in D.C. aren't asking these other global leaders for money? Is that what's going on? Or we're afraid to ask, or what's going on there?
Well, you know, I think foreign policy is something that is like a business, like everything else. I mean, you know, and when you get to the negotiating table, and if you have a president that gets in the face of another country and says, hey, this isn't a fair agreement. we need to revamp this. That's what we're lacking. We have this, total ignoring of China, the threat that it is. The same thing with the Russians. The same thing with the Iranians. Our politicians need to do a much better job at being businessmen and getting us a better deal. I can't see the Saudis or anybody else saying no if we put a reasonable demand on their table, saying this is what we need in order to keep our relationship strong.
I mean, if each country gave 1% of their GDP or less, that'd help.
Oh, tremendously.
Or the UN say, hey, UN, you guys want us to come over here? Supply. Our U.S. taxpayers paid $1 trillion on this bill. They just approved it, shipped it over in cash to someone's account over there. I think the UN can afford to, send us a couple $1 billion in trade something. I don't know. I'm not an economic expert.
I'm smiling because I have been close to NATO forces and UN forces, and remember, most of the funding for the UN comes from where?
America.
There you go. Oh. So yes, they should be contributing even more because some of that money is already ours. So there's a lot of folks out there, even presidents that have said we need to get away from the UN because it's an effete, politicized organization.
It's just draining our bank account and is creating inflation. Now we're looking at if you're listening to this show and you don't think that the war really has a cause and effect on us, what is the interest rate right now? Just ask yourself that. And then my buddy is a general contractor, my best friend from high school. He told me here we may be pushing 12% by the end of the year. What's that going to do for your mortgage? What's that going to do for borrowing for a car? If you don't think these global things influence our interest rate, they actually do. And so many people. What infuriates me is so many people live in a bubble and they don't want to. Oh, I don't live in my safe space. But it affects you. It affects all of us.
It really does.
And it's like, I think people are afraid to say anything because the repercussions from their friends. Because after the last election was so polarizing. I mean, I've heard people have got divorced. I've heard people were best friends, and over a president running for office, they separated because they argued all the time. And I think that might be driven by our adversaries overseas. They want that.
Yep. It's funny because you just hit on something that's one of my pet peeves. When you go to vote, nobody's looking over your shoulder. Mm-hmm. You could vote whoever you want. I don't discuss politics. I know how I vote. Yeah. But I think that's where people are lacking. If look at the impact of what leaders do, good, bad, or indifferent, and support them or counter them accordingly. The example that I always use, Mark, because again, I don't talk present day politics. Yeah. But look what happened during the Jimmy Carter years. Jimmy Carter was a brilliant Navy officer, one of the nicest human beings, a true humanitarian, but he was a very naive individual, and the world saw him immediately as food. You have to understand, and you know this from your Marine Corps experience, they're predators and they're victims. And all our enemies are major predators. The Soviets, the Chinese, the Iranians, the whole radical Islam. Those are major monsters. And when they see weak leadership, like with Jimmy Carter, that they could not take him seriously. If he clenched his fist and hit the desk, nobody would believe it. So having somebody lead the country that when people sit across the table, they go, and this is not a person, male or female, that we want to mess with.
Wow.
Under Carter, Russia invaded, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan almost immediately. The Iranians took our hostages for 444 days.
Wow.
The Panama Canal was given up. One of the most strategic things in our geopolitical sphere. And all this happened in a 4-year term under Jimmy Carter.
4 years.
What happened when Ronald Reagan took power? The very next day, the Iranians released all our hostages.
Wow.
Very next day, because he went from, I swear, and they knew that the next thing was going to be push a button on them. So yeah, I think strong leadership, credible leadership is what, and I've said this in the book, and I've said it in other things.
Mm-hmm.
My experience, like you, dealing so much with our special operations folks, this country will never have a shortage of warriors.
Love that.
We suffer a shortage of leaders.
Interesting.
And I'll take it one step further.
Yeah.
Leaders who have served.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when President Trump ran his first election, there were 11 candidates on that platform.
I remember.
There were no veterans.
No veterans at all. Wow, that's so true. I never thought about that until you mentioned that just now. That's wild.
So we need to do better in electing our leaders, not based on social media, not less on trying to cater to 0.2% of whatever. What is best for the country? What's the kind of individual that can lead us back into what we're supposed to be? And like I said, I honestly believe that the United States keeps the world afloat.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that one. We're, like you said, we are the world's policemen. We bring peace. We're the most giving country in the world. When countries have chaos, we're sending our Navy ships over with what? Food and water. Every time.
Right. It's one of the points I always love to make is they call us an imperialist nation. Name me what territory we gained after World War II as a country.
Zero.
The exception, I'll tell you the exception. The cemeteries where our soldiers are buried overseas is the only land that we as Americans got out of Second World War II.
Wow. Never thought about that. Yeah, in Normandy, right?
Sure.
Well, folks, if you're listening, you're getting a really good history lesson on leadership in our country by Rick. And you read his book because I think there's a lack of history in our education system. And we need to really focus on, education tells the future of where you're going.
Mark, thank you. And I will tell you the two biggest compliments that I get very often. First, from my military friends and contacts, thanking me for portraying the realistic light on what the U.S. Special Operations and the agency does. That for me is sacrosanct. The second one is a lot of parents that have written to me and said, I loved your book. I have given it to my kids, or I bought books for my kids for Christmas. That's what I wrote the book for, to have people be able to have access to something that is apolitical but factual.
That is so needed right now in the state of our country. I'm not going to beat up on the president or anything like that. He was elected, whether you believe the election was stolen or not. He was elected. We have a process. We had a transfer of power, and listeners may hate Biden, may hate Trump, but we are still Americans regardless of who the president is. And we still have the Constitution of the United States that gives us what we have today, a lifestyle, a freedom, a way of life. And listen to this, listeners. Why is it that every time I meet an immigrant in Los Angeles, when I was doing bodyguard and work in LA, they come up to me and I have my Marine Corps t-shirt on and say, you have to tell your friends in LA that this is the greatest country ever created in modern history. I'm like, everybody that tells me that is an immigrant from another country. They become millionaires. Why? Because they see the opportunity of what America holds. America still is that hope, light of hope for the rest of the world. Even though you don't think that, if you're 20 or 30 something, you think America is just a joke. It's not a joke. People.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
People die on boats from Cuba coming across that ocean to get here. Why? Because they're willing to take a risk. Why do you think all those immigrants are coming from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Peru, and taking that 3-month trip on their feet? Because they know this land is the land of opportunity.
You know, Mark, the biggest problem I've been asked this many times, what's the biggest problem that we face? And the problem that we have in America is that the average American does not know how good we have it.
Oh, so true.
It is. I mean, I've been to Europe. I've been to Italy. I love Italy. But try to go to a post office or the DMV in Italy. You know, it's just, this is the best country. And notice that the walls that should be built for, immigration is not to keep Americans in. And you use an example very dear to me, the Cuban, the diaspora. You know how many tens of thousands of Cubans are in the bottom of that ocean?
So true.
Thousands. And they were just escaping, not for, just for freedom, going after freedom.
And people are dying for that hope, that thought of hope of what could be that American dream, white picket fence. And that's what Hollywood sells so well. But unfortunately, they do such a disservice to the agency of what the agency really does for the country and our freedoms. And I'm so glad you wrote that book. I want to do a little dive with you on, as far as the agencies, it's like its own brotherhood. I know, Mike Trott, who worked the Protected, he worked for George Tenet. He's a good friend of mine.
He's a great guy. I know.
He's a great thinker. He's I worked under his leadership on a job in Beverly Hills, and I just watched him while I was there for that job for 3 months for that family that we worked for. And he just very calm under pressure. You guys have a calmness. You're very analytical folks. You're thinkers. You process information in a different way, maybe because of your training. But what about the agency did you love the most?
That's a good question. Let me start by telling you that most real good warriors are thinkers. That's part of the leadership process there. For me, the agency was the vehicle that I was able to legitimize my family's right to call themselves Americans. That's the way I saw it. I went into Air Force Pararescue in 1971 with the sole intention of going to Vietnam. My draft number was astronomical. They would have never called me. My parents were furious that I enlisted and I went into the military for that purpose. So for me, the agency was a dream come true because I read a lot. And not just the James Bond novels that I read when I was 13 years old. Yes, that affects me. I've known about Wild Bill Donovan and the OSS since I was in high school. How many high schoolers even think of that? So for me, the impact that the agency can have, the beauty of the agency is that we are solely created for a purpose, which is to do what nobody else can do legally. Because we as the agency, there's two things that we do. We collect intelligence, all source intelligence, whether it's technical, human, open, or whatever. And we do covert action, black ops, on the behest of the President of the United States. And the single biggest quality, besides the patriotism of my colleagues, that the agency has is its flexibility. And I'll give you an example. After 9/11, we knew that we needed to go and re-recruit the Northern Alliance. Within 24 hours, we had boxes of $100 bills on our floor. And one of the guys, the finance guy, I was looking at him, I said, man, that was pretty quick. He goes, Rick, he says, not even the Treasury Department could come up with this kind of money in the amount of time because of the bureaucracy. The money's sitting there, but the agency under Title 50 especially has that ability to say, boom, this is what we're going to do because that's what the president asked us to do.
Wow. You had those boxes of dollar bills within hours.
When Gary went into to Afghanistan with that team weeks after 9/11. They literally had a guy sleeping on the money boxes every night just to keep them secure.
How much was in there? Are you allowed to say?
Yeah, well, the thing that people don't understand, there's a movie called, you probably saw it, called 12 Strong.
Yeah,
And
I love that movie.
it's a great movie if you're a Green Beret, which one of my sons is, and I've taught hundreds of them over the last decade. And it's a great movie if you are a Task Force 160th individual, who, again, from Richard Pear on down, I know several, former commanders of that elite unit. What they do not represent at all in that movie is the fact that when that ODA came into country in those helicopters, it was my guys on the ground vectoring them in.
It was your guys.
Mike Spann, I'm wearing his bracelet.
Wow.
Those kind of guys. Mike Spann was the first American killed after 9/11 in the war. Former Marine, recon type guy, Raider. And here you get this movie that you yourself like. The only reason it ruined the movie for me was that here's how the agency was represented. There was a tragically white guy on a donkey with bags full of money that comes up to the team leaders of the ODA, tells them about, yeah, I'll introduce you to so-and-so. And the guy goes off on his donkey, a single guy on a donkey. And the team sergeant looks at the officers and goes, I don't know who that guy is, but he's got some stones. That's the only credit that the agency has in there. And I have guys like Jose Rodriguez, who was a very good friend of mine. Jose was livid. He actually wrote to some of the generals and said, how could you do this? How can you, not allow or not push for a true story? And that true story was that we had our team on the ground before they did. And by the way, every single adventure that movie depicts, there were CIA officers in every single incident, because we had people, as soon as they hit the ground and they split up in teams, we had men in every single one of those teams. A classmate of mine shot a Muj from horseback in one of those scenes for real.
Wow.
And none of these guys were recognized in that movie or my agency. Yeah.
They weren't recognized.
Pisses me off.
Wow. I'd be upset. But because of you guys, there's peace globally.
We're part of it. Look, national security is a team sport. And there's no I in team. I will never say that the world will end if the agency doesn't exist. But that we are a substantial cog in the wheel. And again, in the years that I taught at Bragg, there wasn't a single day that somebody didn't come up to me and go, "Hey, Rick, how do I get into Ground Branch? How do I get into the agency?" Because that's the attraction. They know that we have, most of the time, a lot of leeway to do things that other organizations cannot do.
But now, you got my brain thinking about Jack Ryan. I just watched the last episode, within a week. I'm just hooked. Is that kind of like what happens in the CIA, that character and going around the globe? Does that stuff really happen out there?
Look, it's Hollywood is Hollywood. I love the early James Bond and the latter, James Bond movies. Why? Because it's fantasy. Nobody's trying to fool me that, I am going to, I'm still waiting for my Aston Martin, right? In 25 years of the agency, I did not get my Aston Martin. So it's fantasy, and you look at it as such, and it's entertainment. Yeah. The other part of it is the documentary. Well, Jack Ryan is actually a fairly decent balanced, but it's got a lot of Hollywood in it. There's, I don't know of any intel analyst, even if he was a former Marine, that is going to be pointy in, working with the ground barrage guys, getting on a ship and shooting people up.
Not going to happen.
Well, it's just, we have our own paramilitary guys that that's what they do.
Right.
The average operations officer in the agency, his or her goal is to never have to pull their gun, because in our business, the minute you draw a weapon, your mission is blown.
They know who you are.
We are a covert action entity. Black ops is what we do. And in Black Ops, if people know who did what, we fail.
You failed your mission.
That's correct.
You give away your secrets.
Yep. And even if you don't get caught, even if you get away with it, if they know the American hand was there, you have failed your mission.
That's a good point. I mean, there's so many missions taking place daily that we don't even know about going around globally. And my thought process is, I wonder if Biden's got some guys over on the ground in Russia right now looking into what they're going to do with Putin if he's going to try to push that nuclear button. Everybody's talking about that right now off on the phone with my buddies. Like, I think, if his next move may be nuclear, but I don't think his general would probably stop that from happening.
I would like to think so. I mean, mutual self-destruction is not an option for any country.
No.
Even small nuclear events can. You talk about something destabilizing the whole economies of every single country in the world. Early on when my book first came out, it was almost simultaneous. My book came out in March, and it was simultaneous with the beginning of the Ukrainian war. And the publishers were worried that it was going to derail their promotion of the book, because and guess what? It ended up being a topic that I could speak to, and at the same time do favors to my book. So, the concept of the United States always taking point in every crisis is not something we should shy away from. But we need to make sure that we are part of a team. We can be the team leaders. We could be the main individuals providing whatever. But we need to have the allies. And I think this is one of the things that I admire that the military is trying to do a lot more now. Instead of fighting 21-year wars, buttressing our allies and the people that fight our enemies, so we don't have to go to war, and they benefit because they don't get overwhelmed by a Russian, or an Iran or a Chinese influence.
Wow, that's pretty wild. What is your thoughts on the Taliban working with China? Did you see that coming as soon as we pulled out, that China would be making a move on Afghanistan? And was that a telltale?
It was so blatantly done. And smart, don't get me wrong. The Chinese are extremely good. Where we have 4-year plans. Actually, 3-year. We have 3-year plans, because by the 4th year you have to be planning. The Chinese have 100-year-old plans.
They do. They play the long game.
Follow it because they don't have congressional size of a house or anything like that. So
interesting. That's true.
That is one of the prices of being a republic. So
wow, yeah, because you're right. Because it's funny how all the politicians have term limits. They have to get reelected every 2 years. And so when we do something military-wise, it's maybe a 2-year occupation. Like Iraq was that went on for what? How many years? 20-year war? It went on for a long time for that occupation. And then, like you said, we gave it back to the countrymen. We said, okay, we're done here. You guys have it. And we spent, billions of dollars. Let me ask you this question. Since you helped Eric Prince run Blackwater, was it worth what we did in Iraq? Because people say, oh, there is no weapons of mass destruction, but I have sources on the ground that said there was, and I don't have that classified information. What is your thought about the Iraq war? Was it a waste of time?
That's a very delicate question, and I've gotten in trouble before because I believe that was one big mistake by the administration going into Iraq at that time. Not that the Iraqis did not deserve better leadership, not that we're supposed to be the supporters of freedom fighters throughout the world. And Saddam Hussein was a vicious dictator and murderer. But it was a matter of timing. It distracted us from Afghanistan, which was the biggest threat to the United States, culminated in 9/11.
Yeah,
that's what we were at the cusp of turning over by what we were able to do to the Taliban and Al Qaeda and everybody who was there. And all of a sudden, you have this. Nobody will ever convince me that we could have not maintained control over Iraq for them not to be able to export anything. They were so monitored that every time they turned on their AAA, we would blow the crap out of it. We knew what they were doing. And whether there were weapons of mass destruction in there or not, well, you know what? There's weapons of mass destruction in Pakistan. And that's scary. In North Korea, that is, we're not going to war against them.
True. Really good point.
Yeah. And let's face it, the dilemma with Pakistan is that you have a large percentage who are very radicalized individuals. And if the government ever topples and they lose control of their armory, their nuclear weapons, guess what? Now you got real terrorists with real nuclear weapons.
That's my thought right now. What you just said there, Rick, that's my biggest concern on U.S. soil with that open border, Mexico-U.S. border, as terrorists coming across with possible ingredients of a new nuke in their hand, in their possession. That's what concerns me the most.
Yep, it's a lot easier done than people would realize. Yeah. And
then another question is too. I often heard that, but one of the reasons Bush went into Iraq was retaliation for Saddam Hussein trying to take his dad out or something like that. Is that conspiracy theory, or is that true, or is that accurate?
There was a threat against the Bush Senior, and that has been thrown out there that I was indeed a personal vendetta kind of thing. I had the honor of meeting President Bush Jr. twice, and I was very impressed with the individual. I believe that the camera was never kind to him. He was a really impressive person when you saw him live. But the other theory, and to me has probably a little bit more credibility, was that Rumsfeld needed to have his own war because Afghanistan was CIA's war.
Yeah, very true.
And he was very, very vociferous about the hell with CIA. We should be doing all this stuff. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think muddied the waters there. So,
I had a thought I have all these CIA things going through my head now. I was listening to the Sean Ryan, Eric Prince show. It's the only podcast I've listened to for 3 hours. It just, once Eric started talking, I'm like, a light bulb just went on. I'm like, oh, now I get it. It makes more sense to me how Washington DC operates. And he broke down he went after the military industrial complex. And I'm like, this makes more sense to me now of what the different things. What is your thoughts on that whole model, that theory?
Yeah, I don't have a great visibility into that world. Eric was a great businessman, and he had intellectual acumen that I don't.
Right.
I'm basically an educated warrior. That's what I like to be see myself. Yeah. It's like it's like the pharmaceutical.
Oh yeah.
Cabal. Does it exist? Absolutely. Is it something that we should try to repair or buttress but it is the military industrial complex is a reality. Whether it's as extreme as some people will paint it, I don't know. I've never worked in that area, but I know that big pharma is also a big deal because I have members of my family with illnesses that can barely afford the medicines because of
the pricing.
So there's always a little bit of truth in conspiracy theories. And that's what makes them so tasty.